This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, Tesla absolutely dominated the news cycle, but we're also going to talk about Volkswagen's electric GTI concept, the $30,000 Fisker Pear, and much more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 166 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. And Tesla did absolutely dominate the news this week with some major product and pricing updates, and we will get to all of that, but I definitely want to make sure that we don't miss out and forget about all of the other awesome things that were happening in the EV world. And while sometimes it does feel like Tesla steals the show, especially here in North America, there is so much going on in the world of electric vehicles. So with that in mind, I am going to save the Tesla news stories for all the way to the end and start with this article about Volkswagen and their plans to electrify the GTI nameplate. Generally, I've been super disappointed with Volkswagen and their product offerings, at least for here in North America. When I look to Europe, with the ID3, the ID2 concept, of course, the ID4 GTX, which I believe is the all-wheel drive that we get here. It just seems like they have a much stronger focus on Europe. So this past week at the Munich Auto Show, they unveiled an electric GTI concept. Of course, the GTI and the Golf R are the performance smaller hatchbacks made from the brand. And my wife loves hatchbacks. In fact, her dream car was the Volkswagen GTI. And after years of promising that one day we would get her one, we finally did back in 2017. However, the used 2011 GTI that we had bought was definitely not the right fit for what she needed, even though it was really everything she wanted. You see, she has been a food delivery driver here in Richmond, Virginia for a number of years. And with the GTI, it takes premium fuel and often needed maintenance and repairs. So after a while, we finally decided that in April of 2021, that it was time to trade the Volkswagen in for a Tesla Model 3 for an electric car that would actually save us, and it has saved us about $250 a month that we're not paying in fuel, maintenance, and repairs. She naturally at the time was heartbroken, and that's understandable. It was her dream car, and she wasn't really into the Model 3 and electric vehicles the way I always have been. But after waiting 4 months, we finally took delivery of the Model 3, and while the performance of the car did put a smile on her face every single day, she absolutely would have preferred an electric GTI if one existed. Well, it looks like Volkswagen might have finally heard her, and I imagine a lot of other people's prayers, and unveiled their concept for a fully electric GTI hatchback. They did unveil it this past week at the Munich IAA Auto Show, and it looks amazing. At first glance, it's very identifiable. No denying that it's a Golf or GTI similar to that. The styling is definitely there, but if you look closer, it does have a lot of similar styling to the ID3 and ID2 EVs that I mentioned Volkswagen has only decided to sell in Europe. Something about North America, manufacturers do not want to bring smaller cars or small hatchbacks to the continent, to this market. And I know I'm not alone, and I know my wife isn't alone. Like, we want smaller hatchbacks. Now, the company didn't mention any performance or battery size or specs, so we'll have to wait on all of that, but I can't imagine that it won't be at least as good in terms of power as the current GTI, maybe. The EV GTI is expected to go on sale in Europe in 2026 and currently is not confirmed for the North American market, but I can't help but hope that it will be inevitable. They will bring this here because I think the GTI, the Golf R, the Ford Focus ST and RS, like those are successful models. People want performance hatchbacks in this country. So hopefully they will bring it here. We definitely need an EV hot hatch like the Spark, but maybe all-wheel drive with a little bit more 0 to 60 performance to it. We have a whole bunch of different electric vehicles from many makes and many models, but they're largely bigger sedans, SUVs, crossovers, trucks. We don't have small electric hatchbacks, and I think we need that like right now. And Volkswagen wasn't the only German automaker unveiling concepts at the auto show in Munich. Mercedes-Benz revealed their concept CLA class EV and suggested that it might be close to what we can expect the production model to be. Mercedes-Benz took the wraps off the concept CLA class electric vehicle in Munich, and the existing product nomenclature and remarks characterizing it as, quote, close to production, end quote, suggest that elements that we have seen with this will appear in the upcoming full redesign of the CLA. Production of the new electric luxury car will commence in late 2024, according to representatives, which suggests that the final product will be the 2025 Mercedes-Benz CLA, at least here in the US market. 3 other spin-offs of the car will follow: a wagon variant, which we probably won't get here in North America either, because for some reason we don't get a lot of wagons. And then a pair of SUVs, which we are almost assured to get, that may become the GLA and GLB replacements. This concept is what Mercedes calls an electric-first clean sheet design. It utilizes their new modular architecture, or the Mercedes-Benz modular architecture, MMA, that was conceived to support more of their entry-level options. And it does appear exactly how you might expect a next-generation CLA class to look, albeit with numerous concept car flourishes, as manufacturers like to do. The design highlights include a beautifully sculpted shark nose with a prominent undercut and smooth flanks with flowing Coke bottle curves to its shape. Its hood is also quite long for an EV, and sadly, the reasoning behind that is because they plan on offering internal combustion engines as well. The EV will be offered in 2 variations: a single motor rear-wheel drive and dual motor all-wheel drive. But Mercedes was not saying whether the gas-powered cars will be front-wheel drive like the current CLA or use rear drive like this EV concept. The power of the rear motor is 235 horsepower and is using technology from Mercedes' Vision EQXX concept that requires close to 0% rare earth minerals. Using a direct drive setup, its output actually flows through a 2-speed transmission, similar to what we've seen on the Porsche Taycan and the Audi e-tron. And they say that's going to enable better efficiency over a wider range of speeds. The motor and battery also employ 800-volt architecture, which naturally is another nod towards efficiency. The concept features next-generation heat pump that not only conveys powertrain heat to the cabin, it also extracts heat from the outside air like a household heat pump, even in the wintertime. Mercedes did unveil some efficiency numbers that they're expecting. They are expecting 12 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers on Europe's WLTP test cycle. So if we convert that to miles per kilowatt hour, that's a little bit more than 5 miles per kilowatt hour, which, if it can achieve that efficiency, would make it one of the more efficient EVs on the road, and we need that. So I'm excited for that. The 800-volt architecture, in addition to being more efficient, will allow DC fast charging at higher rates. Mercedes is targeting 250 kilowatts, which is kind of, I don't want to say low, but that definitely feels like the 800-volt architecture has a little bit more to offer. So maybe they're just bringing that back, being a little conservative with that. Mercedes did not share the battery size, but if we take their efficiency number, and that they're saying that the mileage, the estimated range could be 750 kilometers, that might suggest that the battery pack's going to be about 90 kilowatt hours or so, depending on, how accurate those numbers are. And that would track with how big the car is. It does feature a wider stance and a longer wheelbase. So definitely more that needs to be revealed about that. We will wait. It's probably going to be months before we really find out a lot more about this, but it's nice to know that they are focusing their attention on occupying the lower rungs of Mercedes-Benz price ladder because we need more affordable, less expensive cars. And on that, the next vehicle is all about affordability. The $30,000 targeted Fisker Pear. Now, that was revealed earlier in August, and the Pear promises to bring affordability to the EV landscape. But at the time, we didn't know much about the capability or the specifications of the vehicle, and now we do. And if it hits the numbers they're putting out there, this is going to be awesome. Before we get to all the numbers, though, let's talk about some of the really cool features. In the rear, rather than having a typical trunk that will fold open, this actually has the lid and glass slide behind the rear bumper beam, which obviously would protect it in the event of a rear crash. Now, Fisker did show off what they're calling the Houdini trunk earlier at slow speeds, but said that the production version will move at a higher rate of speed, so you're not just sitting around waiting for it to open. In the front, they are calling it the Fruit, F-R-O-O-T. Not sure why Frunk isn't good enough. It will be offered with an insulated option, which is going to help keep food hot or cold, which honestly, that would be really good for delivery drivers driving in the city, dropping off food. So that's cool. The Pear will also include a lounge mode, enabling all of the seats, front and rear, to fold completely flat. Now, obviously, you're probably thinking, well, why in the world would you want to do that? Well, they have an optional 17.1-inch rotating screen that you can then lay down and watch a movie or other entertainment. Another option will include seating for 6 with a sizable 2-seat bench replacing the front passenger seat and center console. And that's pretty cool because that's not something that we see all that often anymore, is having the ability to fit a front passenger in between the driver and the traditional front passenger. So let's get to the numbers. They are still targeting a price of $30,000, which would be awesome, at least the base price. It will have 2 battery options, and they're sharing the range estimates for the 2 options. The smaller battery, they're saying, will provide about 180 miles, and the larger one around 320 miles. Naturally, that could be used for longer road trips. It is going to be offered in rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive options with 20-inch wheels standard and 22-inch wheels optional. Fisker says that the Pear will be its first vehicle to use its in-house high-performance computer, they're calling the Fisker Blade, that will, quote, offer a completely new connected and digital customer experience for the era of software-defined vehicles, end quote. And that quote doesn't really tell us anything. I love how PR speak is full of words, but empty in what they're actually talking about. So basically, this is going to be very, very high tech. I'm interested to see how that translates to specific features that customers can enjoy. They are planning additionally a high performance Fisker Pear Extreme model that'll be included in the lineup later. They intend to display a production intent Pear at the Fisker Lounge Munich starting September 4th, which I was originally recording this on September 4th, but now I'm re-recording it on September 9th. So it should be up now. The new Pear will be built in the US in collaboration with Foxconn at the Lordstown, Ohio factory, and that will enable it to qualify for the IRA tax credits. Manufacturing and deliveries are expected to begin in July of 2025. And if there are no changes to the tax credit structure between now and then, if you sprung for the base model Fisker Pear with no options, no upgrades, and qualified for a $7,500 tax credit, if you're doing the math here, that's a $22,500 EV with about 180 miles of range, assuming that it's an accurate estimate. We can take a guess at how that might translate to efficiency and battery size, which is how we really want to talk about EVs, not necessarily only mentioning range. So if we assume that it would be a little bit more efficient than its larger Fisker Ocean sibling, say somewhere around 3.5 to 4 miles per kilowatt hour, then we would get battery sizes that are 45 to 51 kilowatt hours usable, which that is going to be my best guess, because that makes sense given the size of the Pear being smaller and also the price, if they can hit that $30,000 target. So I'm excited, and this should be a very promising option and in the affordable space. Next, I want to shift to something that's not as exciting or really exciting at all. Have you ever had somebody in your life that came to you and they were really excited about plans they had for the future and that they were going to take steps to change and grow, and they're very excited about all of this? And maybe they keep telling you how they have been changing, but maybe you just don't see it. Or maybe they're just making a bunch of excuses about how hard it is to change, but that they're trying and it's just going to take time. And they really turn on the charm, like really just they're getting excited. And then you fall into the trap of thinking about how great things are going to be as well. And so you get excited, but then time goes on and you don't really see much more than just talk. And you find out that instead of really working hard to change, or maybe alongside their efforts to change, they're actually taking actions that directly contradict everything that they've been telling you. Well, I'm sure we've all had people in our lives like this. They're called narcissists. Now, this being an EV podcast, you're probably either really confused. I might have lost you in all of that introduction to this next news article. Or maybe you know exactly where I'm going with this. So Green Car Reports has an article that is covering some of the contradictions in the EV world. They have written, despite professed support for EVs, many automakers are quietly fighting proposed EPA emissions rules that would require likely expanding EV sales. And this is according to a report that Green Car Reports found from the National Resources Defense Council, the NRDC. The EPA this spring proposed tailpipe emissions rules for 2027 through 2032, setting a goal of reducing emissions by about 56% in 2032 compared to levels in 2026. And to do that, the agency estimates that automakers will need to sell a lot more EVs, but they don't mandate specifically that EVs need to be what manufacturers do to clean up tailpipe emissions. The current rules can be met with about 17% electric vehicles by 2026. The new rules may nudge that percent up to 67%, at least according to the projections, if auto manufacturers choose to go that route instead of making the internal combustion engine much more tailpipe friendly, if you will. So apparently this is too ambitious for many automakers who have already said that they have plans to be all EV or largely EV by 2030 or 2035. So the time frame by 2032 to have 67% EVs, that doesn't sound like it's against what the automakers were planning anyway, according to what they are telling us. However, many automakers have submitted public comments to the EPA criticizing this proposal, and the NRDC highlighted all of this in a recent blog post. So I bet you can guess which automakers might have an issue with this. General Motors, in 2021, they announced their aspiration to eliminate tailpipes from their passenger cars by 2035, which, if we go only on what they're telling us, that sounds great. Having 50% of new car sales by 2030 is absolutely something to get excited about. However, behind the scenes, they may be seeking higher emissions levels than what has been proposed by the EPA rules. For example, in comments that were filed on July 4th, GM appears to recommend higher NOx levels, NOx, for light-duty vehicles in the early years of the program with lower levels later versus what has been proposed. And on the medium-duty vehicle side, it appears that GM is recommending much higher NOx levels than what the EPA has proposed. And Green Car Reports did reach out to GM for clarification on that filing, which they haven't gotten a response, at least that I have found. And I would imagine GM is really doing this because they want to still focus on larger profit-generating full-size trucks. GM wasn't the only one, though. Honda, in filed comments, said agencies shouldn't treat automaker EV announcements as, quote, foregone conclusions, end quote. So basically, they're saying they can make announcements, but then they should be allowed to walk that back at any point. Stellantis called the proposed rules a, quote, overly optimistic expectation for EV market growth, end quote, even though they have promised 25 U.S. market EVs by 2030. But they haven't discussed anticipated market share. So maybe they'll have the models in production, but not be making a whole lot of them, which is weird because Stellantis previously said that it was aiming for 100% EV sales in Europe by 2030. Now, it has already begun to backtrack on that. They've added gasoline versions of the Jeep Avenger in more European markets than they had originally planned. So you've got kind of this, I don't want to say lies, but definitely the public is hearing one thing, and behind not necessarily closed doors, because the EPA comments are available, but they're obviously saying different things. There is one standout exception, however, of the major automakers, and that's Ford. Ford submitted comments supporting the EPA's proposed rules. The automaker said it, quote, supports the 2032 endpoint of the multi-pollutant proposal, which may result in approximately 67% of new light and medium-duty vehicles being electric, end quote. And it added that they are all in on electrification. They say, quote, we are investing more than $50 billion through 2026 to deliver breakthrough electric vehicles that reach a global run rate of 600,000 EVs a year by the end of this year, 2023, and a run rate of 2 million EVs per year in 2026. Now, the public comment period is a part of the process of rule approval, which also includes reconciling the EPA emissions rules with proposed corporate average fuel economy standards, CAFE standards, from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. That agency released its proposal in July, aiming for 43.5 mile per gallon average across all new vehicles by 2032. Meanwhile, California has been following through on their regulatory steps that will essentially ban gasoline-fueled light vehicles by 2035, which this does not count plug-in hybrids. So plug-in hybrids aren't going to be banned. And after attempting to revoke California's emissions authorities through the Clean Air Act, GM openly stated that it is siding with California's rules in 2021. But again, it appears that GM is on two different tracks: public and regulatory. So with all this talk about tailpipe emissions standards and rules and trying to clean all of that up, I think it's important to note why all of this really matters. You know, when I first entered the EV space, I didn't know. I wasn't entering because I wanted to save the planet, attack climate change. I didn't really know anything about air quality or have any motivation or passion to address clean air standards. So what this actually means, what they're trying to do is reduce the poisons, the toxins that come out of the tailpipe, specifically NOx, which is nitrogen dioxide, or more commonly referred to as NOx. And the NRDC does note that NOx reacts with atmospheric chemicals to form secondary fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, and this fine particulate matter can be breathed in and actually go through the lungs, entering the bloodstream. So this has major respiratory effects, can cause strokes, heart attacks, affect people that are sensitive with just pulmonary and cardiac situations anyway. Those with asthma conditions, it can be made a lot worse. So that's why all the EPA rules are important, is because we want to have cleaner air, because we want to be breathing cleaner air, reduce health problems, reduce the strain on the health system, the insurance system. I mean, the effects of tailpipe emissions are quite significant if you really break it all the way out. And unfortunately, they tend to affect populations disproportionately, where the people that typically live closer to highways or urban areas where there's a lot more pollution, they are typically peoples of color or people that are not wealthy. But tailpipe emissions really affect everybody. Wherever you are, wherever you drive, wherever you live, if you're breathing this in, it is in some way affecting your overall health. This is just, it's not good. So cleaning up the air is going to really help not just climate change and addressing carbon in the atmosphere, but also by reducing the fine particulate matter that we are breathing, we can be a much healthier population overall. And there are numerous benefits, both from a health aspect, but also an economic aspect that we can't ignore this. Like, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is the reason for these EPA standards. And the fact that you have automakers that are saying one thing with their press releases, getting us all excited and saying that they want to be, 50% or all EV by a certain date, but then in these other filings complaining on the regulatory side of things that it's just too much and that they can't do it or they don't want to do it, that just makes me sick. We need to demand continuity in messaging, but then also demand that automakers follow through with their promises to provide clean vehicles for us to use. Okay, on to the Tesla news stories you've been waiting for, but not quite the biggest ones yet. No, let's first talk about the recently released photos of the Tesla Cybertruck's front trunk. And well, it's really small, and I can't see that it's very useful, to be honest. It's shallow but really wide and doesn't have any dividers that can be set up to limit the amount of space that something could slide side to side. So if you did put something up front and it didn't take up the entire space, you're going to have some movement out of that. There are, at least from what I can see, no outlets for plugging in tools like a lot of other trucks have, like the F-150 Lightning comes to mind. And I'm not even sure how much you could put in there because the hood comes down as a diagonal angle. So even a cooler full of ice might have an issue letting the hood completely close. And obviously, if it's not completely closed, you don't want to drive like that. So I can't help but question that this part of the truck, was it somewhat of an afterthought, or did they just not think about it at all because they were so focused on everything else that obviously has been a significant challenge with designing and producing the Cybertruck? It just seems like after all of the hard work Tesla has put into this, they could have come up with something that was a little bit more versatile and functional, like the F-150 Lightning or the upcoming Silverado EV. If it had a couple outlets in there or a slider that could expand horizontally so that once the trunk lid was open, you could slide that out and have a little bit more flat space up front. I don't know. Just a couple ideas. I'd love to hear what you think. Now then, let's talk about the two biggest news stories from the week. And yes, I did save them for the end here, but you stayed too, so it's all good, right? When it comes to pricing Tesla's vehicles, the company has historically been somewhat chaotic with frequent pricing changes, sometimes as little as $500 decrease or increase in price, but then sometimes they can have really massive price reductions, as seems to be the trend with them this year. And yes, they did it again, this time with the most expensive Model S and Model X. They axed the standard range versions of each and dropped the pricing now down below $90,000. So that's right, you can now get a more than 1,000 horsepower family sedan or a big SUV for less than 90 grand. And yes, I recognize $90,000 is still a lot of money, but for what you're getting at that price, I mean, I felt like especially the Model S Plaid was a steal at $130,000 or $110,000. 90? That is just insane. And the long range versions of each, which is now essentially the base model, are now at $74,990 and $79,990 respectively. What's important to note on the Model X is the price point now makes that long-range Model X eligible for the $7,500 tax credit because it's an SUV. And all the paint colors are free now, included in the price of the vehicles. So what has happened within a 12-month time frame, you have the Model S Plaid dropping in price by 40 grand and the Model X Plaid dropping in price by $50,000. So what does all of this mean aside from the obvious? Well, I have a couple questions. First, what does this do to their per vehicle profit margin that I can imagine had to have taken a fairly significant hit? And then what will other automakers do? The Lucid Air comes to mind. What will they do in response to this, if anything? Will Porsche change the pricing of the Taycan now that their base model Taycan, their entry level, is more expensive than Tesla's top of the line Model S, that it's more efficient. It has a longer EPA rated range. It's significantly more powerful. You would have to really want specifically a Porsche in order to go for the base model Porsche Taycan. What will Audi do? Mercedes-Benz, anything. I mean, there are so many vehicles that have been competing in this luxury sedan and luxury performance sedan segment. And now Tesla is basically undercutting all of them so significantly on price. What will they do? Will they lower prices as well? Or will they just kind of ignore Tesla and keep going? Don't know. Okay, saving the best for last, maybe? I don't know. It's certainly the last news story anyway. Tesla finally released the Model 3 refresh dubbed Project Highland, and it's mostly amazing with a couple of exceptions. So let's go over the good stuff, and then I'll cover some of the other notable differences. A look at the new Model 3 shows that Tesla made it a point to make the Project Highland update evident in both the vehicle's interior as well as exterior. Tesla says that they changed 50% of the parts of the vehicle to make it more stylish and more aerodynamic. These changes resulted in a car that looks more aggressive and mature compared to its predecessor. But back to aerodynamics, Tesla says that the redesign drops the coefficient of drag to 0.219, making it now their most aerodynamic vehicle ever. And I think one of the most, if not the most aerodynamic EV on the market. Naturally, this improvement also translates to an improvement to the vehicle's overall efficiency, which I will get to here in a minute. Moving to the rear, the new Model 3 features redesigned taillights that are no longer split between one section on the body of the car and the other on the trunk lid. The lights also feature a new pattern that gives it a notably sharper look. The interior has received a significant makeover as well. As observed in the Model 3 Project Highland test units, this features a new steering wheel, which I'll get back to, and a new center console. An LED strip is also present in the dashboard and door panels for ambient lighting. The front seats are ventilated, so now they can cool as well as heat passengers as needed. And the rear has a screen dedicated for rear passengers, just like we saw on the refreshed Model S. Matt Watson, who you may know from CarWow, that YouTube channel, they do a lot of drag racing and vehicle reviews and whatnot. He said that Tesla made it a point to focus on the new Model 3's comfort. The outgoing Model 3 features acoustic glass on the windshield and front windows, but now with the Highland update, Matt was pointing out that also the rear windows have acoustic glass, and that has made this much more sound insulated than the previous versions of the Model 3, as well as a couple of aerodynamic tricks to deflect wind over the windshield and make that wind noise a lot quieter. So it's more comfortable, it's quieter, it's better looking, it has more features. And I mean, overall, I'm really excited to see that Tesla has been working on this, because the Model 3 has started to get a little outdated in terms of its looks. I mean, it's basically been unchanged for the most part since it was introduced. On Tesla's vehicle configurator in Europe, which is not like the only place that they're offering it right now, it's not available for the US. The Project Highland comes in two variations, a rear-wheel drive version and a dual motor all-wheel drive long-range variant. They're showing that Model 3 deliveries for Project Highland are currently listed at Q4 of this year. Now, the stuff that I'm not so sure about, the turn signal is no longer a stalk. The windshield wiper controls are no longer a stalk or even a button on the end of a stalk. The gear selector is no longer a stalk. In fact, there's no stalks coming off the steering column at all. The buttons have been moved to the steering wheel. I am not so sure about this. I've never driven a car with the turn signal and horn and all of the buttons and everything on the steering wheel. So actually, that's not true. I did drive the Model S Plaid, but it was only a test drive, and I didn't focus on those things because I was focused on the speed. But I don't know. I'm kind of going to hold out on this. I definitely want to test it out. But the steering wheel, the capacitive touch buttons provide haptic feedback instead of, with the Model S and Model X, the vibrating of the steering wheel to let you know you had selected something. And Matt Watson, once again at CarWow, said that they felt very much like real buttons. So it is a steering wheel, not a yoke, which I know was controversial to begin with. So we'll see. To select the gears, just like with the Model S and Model X, it's on the center screen. You got to swipe down or up depending on the direction you want to go. So Tesla is working towards removing parts that require human interaction and instead changing things to be much more digital, which is certainly in line with their quest for removing the driver altogether. That's why, personally, I think Tesla is making some of these changes, and also those changes that are designed to digitize the driver experience and ultimately replace or eliminate the driver. Those are the things I'm not really so thrilled about because I like driving and I want to feel the car. I want to move a lever for the turn signals. I like the idea of having a gear selector that you touch and move, not having it on a screen. So I don't know, but the rest of it, ventilated seats, now that I've experienced that in some of the test vehicles I've had, like the Cadillac Lyriq comes to mind, I don't want to drive a car that doesn't have ventilated seats anymore. Like, it's just so nice to have. And I think there are a couple other features that I've seen in vehicles recently that I would love if they would have added it, like a head-up display would be really nice. I would love Tesla to reintroduce a moon roof or a sunroof that allows you to open up and have some fresh air coming in that way. But overall, this is just spectacular. So I'm really excited about it. And it hasn't put this refreshed Model 3 on my want list, although I guess that's kind of irrelevant because right now there is no indication as to when we will have this available here in North America. Okay, so that is it for the news this week, but don't go anywhere. I've got the question of the week and some ending announcements coming up right after this. Hello, friends and EV enthusiasts. Did you know the best electric vehicle event is almost upon us? Join EV Resource and drive electric RVA at Dominion Raceway in the heart of Virginia on Saturday, October 7th for the 2023 Electric Vehicle Festival. Mingle with fellow EV owners and enthusiasts, connect with industry experts, and feel the thrill of driving your EV on a 2-mile racetrack or drag strip. Not an EV owner yet? You can get all of your questions answered in the EV Education Zone, take a ride in the Arcimoto FUV around the NASCAR Oval, or hop in with one of our EV owners and take a ride around the track. So what are you waiting for? Grab your tickets right now on Eventbrite and come celebrate the excitement of electric vehicles with us October 7th for the East Coast's must-attend EV event. Okay, it's time now for the question of the week. This segment is a part of the interactive portion of the podcast where you all have a chance to get your thoughts and voices heard. Every question of the week is posted publicly to the EV Resource Patreon page, and I do encourage everyone, not just the current Patreon supporters, to participate. Last time, I had asked you all what commercial vehicles should be electrified as a priority. Which ones should be first? And Andy Cooper said, quote, trash trucks, dump trucks, and those oddly shaped vehicles at airports, end quote. Christopher Lawrence said, quote, every police car needs to be a Mach-E or Model Y. This is a no-brainer and could start today, end quote. And Rajeev Narayan said, quote, light-duty trucks in the U.S. account for 323.1 million metric tons of CO2 emissions, which is 17% of U.S. emissions in this sector. Medium and heavy-duty trucks in the U.S. account for 444.4 million metric tons, reportedly comprising 20% of the sector's emissions, despite only representing 5% of the vehicles on the road. So I would say electrifying light and medium-duty trucks could have the largest impact on CO2 emissions with the least number of vehicles. Hopefully, the Cybertruck will be successful. I was hopeful for the Ford F-150 as well as GM and Ram electric offerings, but it looks like they're not planning to produce these vehicles in the volumes or price ranges needed to make a significant impact, end quote. And I gotta say, great responses from all three of you. I agree with all of it. If I had to pick one area to electrify first, I would probably agree with Rajeev because that is what's going to make the biggest impact on overall emissions, to his point, with the least amount of vehicles. Aside from that, because I've got 3 small kids, the only thing that I think about is the fumes that they're breathing when they're riding on the bus. And so reducing that by electrifying school buses, I think will go a long way towards affecting health, and especially health for kids in their developmental years. So for this week, I am curious what you all think about the inconsistency of communication from the automakers about their apparent efforts, or in reality, maybe the lack thereof, to transition to a fleet of all electric vehicles. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on this? I will have the question pinned to the top of the EV Resource Patreon page. You can find that at patreon.com/EV Resource. And as a reminder, you do not have to be a current Patreon supporter to answer the question. So check that out and let me know what you think. On then to the EV Resource Hotline segment. This is your chance to be featured on the podcast. All you have to do is call in and leave me your EV question, comment, or discussion topic. And it's super easy to do this. Simply use your smartphone's built-in voice recording software, record your message, and then email that to me at hello@ev-resource.com. I am looking also at getting a toll-free phone number that you can just call in, but that's not ready yet. So for the time being, just record the file and email it to me. This week, I have a comment from John in Salisbury about preparedness in emergency situations for first response vehicles. Take it away, John.
Hey, Zach, this is John in Salisbury, Maryland. I was just listening to your interview with Nick Casas, and one thing that occurred to me is that in a brownout or blackout situation, I don't know about hydrogen, but with petroleum-based fuels, you're not going to be able to refuel anyway because the pumps rely on electricity. So it seems to me that the best solution, if you really want 100% uptime with emergency vehicles, is to go full battery electric and then just have an off-grid microgrid to be able to provide power and charge even if, all heck is breaking loose elsewhere. Thanks for your time. Have a great one.
John, naturally, I couldn't agree with you more. If we had more energy storage solutions, and it doesn't even need to be battery energy storage, it could be something else, we could always have a reliable source of energy to be able to charge emergency vehicles when and if they needed it. So I completely 100% agree. Okay, I've got a couple of announcements to cover before I go. I want to thank the Patreon supporters who generously give their hard-earned dollars to help keep the show going. At the top tier, the director tier, we have Rajeev Narayan and Andy Cooper. At the executive producer tier, we have Christopher Lawrence. And at the producer tier, we have Eric Weber, Charles Hall, and Bruce Gallant. Thank you so much to those members, as well as to all of the additional Patreon members that support my efforts at lower amounts. Big or small, it's all appreciated. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support my efforts, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/EV Resource and consider a monthly pledge. Every little bit helps, and there are stacking bonuses in it for you at each pledge level, from ad-free episodes of the EV Resource podcast to merch and a lot more. And if supporting the show financially isn't your cup of tea, then I'd humbly ask that you share the podcast with a friend. Subscribe to the EV Resource YouTube channel, connect with me on social media, and or leave a rating and review on your podcast app. All of those things help grow the show, and they don't require anything but a few moments of your time. Additionally, because I don't want to have mandatory membership fees or paywalls, I use advertising and affiliate connections to help keep this free for everybody. So please consider all of the sponsors and organizations that have agreed to support EV Resource. You can find a full listing and all of the deals and coupon codes that are up at ev-resource.com/deals. If you have any feedback for me, I invite you to email me at hello@ev-resource.com. And that is all for this podcast episode. So thank you so much for being with me, and I'll catch you next time.